Outside of Monroe, we got 80% of the vote in Monroe. She made an issue out of firearms ownership. As you know, I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. And she ran as being more liberal than I, and that I'm some kind of a conservative. And the people didn't believe it. We went into a lot of her district and took the whole areas and lots of people away from her. And we had my good friends in labor, and we had, we picked up strong support in the African American community. Poles and the Italians and the ethnic groups with whom I have a historic friendship, they came through in big order. And the result was that about 10:30 that night, I got a concession. Lynn was very gracious about it. And we ran what was essentially a good, clean campaign. She had Emily's list, which came in and dumped $5 million into the race. I had to raise $3 million. Most expensive race I ever ran. Spent more in that race than I'd spent in all of the races previous.
Is that right? More in the one.
Yeah. And happily, we haven't had that kind of exercise since.
So your first race and those two were the toughest in terms
I had some other races that were difficult. We had, in '72, we had the issue of busing and cross-district busing to achieve racial balance in the schools. Nedzi and O'Hara and Billy Ford almost lost over it. When we had the redistricting that year, I took a lot of Billy's problem areas. And as a result, Billy Ford, who was a great friend of mine, won, which he probably wouldn't have done. Nedzi and O'Hara almost lost that year over that particular issue. It was really a spurious issue.
Was it drawn in your race?
That got people very excited.
Was in your race, was it a key issue?
It was an important issue, but we handled it politically better.
How did you shape your message?
Well, we just told folks that, well, it was an interesting thing. Bella Abzug got on me one time on the House floor. She said,
She was the congresswoman from New York.
From New York.
Yeah.
She was a very left-wing, kind of outrageous person with big hats, quite frankly. There's some funny stories you can tell about Bella, which I won't tell today. But she said I was a racist demagogue. She said so on the floor. Got the floor taken away from her and couldn't speak for a day. That nearly killed her. But she came over to me afterwards and said, "You're a racist demagogue." I said, "Bella, I'm a racist demagogue, and I represent a whole district full of racist demagogues. We hold integrated meetings to denounce damn fools like you that want to bus our kids to areas far away from their homes and their families and their neighborhoods and put them in danger." I said, and our African American folks and our white folks all resent this idea, and I'm going to do everything I can to stop this sort of nonsense and see that we give first-class education to our kids in their neighborhood schools. And that was the policy that ultimately came to be. And it's still the best policy, educate your kids close to home.
So you carried the history and reputation as a civil rights advocate, but in this instance, you're objecting to a particular...
Yeah, but the point, Lynn, is that we, in fact, had very broad interracial opposition to this silly idea. And our African American folks were just as much opposed to it as were the white folks. So the end result was that it failed, as it well should have. And I had the support of every racial group in the district on my position. Because they didn't want their kids moved away so that they couldn't get to them if there's a problem in the school or if there's a problem with the child's health.
Right.
That worries every parent, and I know it because I've got 4.
You talked about your father and your history of support for labor unions. You've also historically been a supporter, obviously. How close are we sitting to the Ford global headquarters here, the district?
Ford headquarters is up the road, probably about 3/4 of a mile.
Your district and constituents have been involved in the auto industry. How has your role changed, if it has, over the years in terms of?
Hasn't changed a bit. I've always supported labor. I've always supported the people who work in the auto industry. And as you very well know, I've been one of those who has seen to it that autos made in the United States are the safest, the cleanest, the most fuel efficient in the world. But interestingly enough, I've seen to it that they have done so under circumstances and on a schedule that was meetable without disrupting the industry and without destroying the jobs of my people.
Did you have a personal relationship with Walter Reuther?
Walter and I, Roy and Victor, his brothers, were good friends. I've been good friends with almost every major labor leader and the head and the officers of almost every local union in my district, whether it's UAW or AFL-CIO or whether it's building trades or a craft union or an industrial union. That includes steel workers and communication workers and building trades and folks like the carpenters and joiners. They're all friends of mine.
The Reuthers are looked at by many as visionaries in terms of building a middle class.
Well, you're absolutely right. The middle class was created by two things. One was the New Deal and Franklin Roosevelt. And Franklin was castigated as a traitor to his class by people of wealth. And he pointed out that he was saving America. He had more communists, by the way, in this country than there were in the Soviet Union. He was scared to death that there was going to be a communist putsch. So he did things to create the safety net in the middle class, not the least of which was creating the American labor movement. Prior to passage of the Wagner Act in Section 7A, which was authored by my dad, it was illegal per se to join a union and to try to bargain collectively over wages, work, and conditions of employment. And so if you will look, you will find that at that time they passed workman's comp and unemployment comp and Social Security and all manner of things, Fair Labor Standards Act, NLRB, things to make it possible for people to rise up the ladder instead of accepting the crumbs that came off the table of the well-to-do. The other thing, of course, was what the labor movement did. And the Reuthers came in and took the UAW away from an organization that was a combination of, or run by a combination of mafiosi and communists. And at that time, in those early days, there were more communists in this country than there were in the Soviet Union. We had 3 million of them, and they had 2. Now, a lot of those people became good, patriotic Americans. As a matter of fact, almost all of them did. But desperate people would go to desperate lengths to solve terrible problems. And so they were real visionaries, but they were not the only visionaries, either in labor or in the society. There were all kinds of people that were trying to make this place better. But they were outstanding leaders, and they did a superb job, and we owe them a great debt, because the American middle class is largely a monument to the New Deal and the labor movement, but they were very especially important leaders